One of the things I like to always present is to realize for us is to have new eyes, is that we don't have to go very many places. If we can open our minds and have a new perspective, it can be a discovery, and to find something that is brand new or a reiteration or a different point of view just by our own attitude of taking off blinders and preconceived conditions. So this is one of my favorite cartoons, which I'm sure Dilbert considered to be an insult, but you can see the last panel. So now you use the science of astrology. It's better than science. It's an art. And that is true. It's science and then the interpretation of it. In my point of view, astrology is a branch of fractal geometry applied to life on Earth. Or you can say that it's a language that if you can understand the language of astrology, the sky speaks to you. And then I always invoke Jupiter because it is that mind expanding capability of having new perspectives, to have a new attitude, and then always Venus because that's balance and design. And I think Venus and Libra are rulers of mathematics, and astrology is a branch of that. So we're looking at duality all the time. And part of the concept is realizing that you can divide the horoscope into 6 signs of either past or future. We traditionally call them masculine and feminine, but you can give it another name too, because really astrology is about a moment in time, and that's always containing the past and into the future. So here's Carl Payne Tobey. This is what he'd look like. And he was in the group of astrologers that started all the astrology magazines in the 1930s. And there was a team of them, like 5 or 6, maybe 10, and they were all the writers for the major magazines. And Grant Louis was major editor for that because he was had a degree in English. Whereas Carl and Grant Louis were best friends, and they were born the same year, 1902. The other big researcher on eclipses and Moon Wobbles was Charles Jane. He specialized that during World War II, but he also recognized that the 90-degree angle where you can't have an eclipse, but you can have a moon wobble, was effective too. Now, the old traditional name for this aspect are lunar bendings. So if you're a traditional astrologer, then look up the term lunar bendings and you'll get the same idea. But we have moon wobbles with eclipses, and we'll get to that. So what I wanted to point out is that Carl did lots of astrological statistics. And one thing he discovered is that everyone has a personal new moon and a full moon. And that is when the transiting moon is either conjunct your sun, which is your personal new moon, or it's in opposition to your sun, which would be your personal full moon. And what he found was that money flowed more easily, particularly when the astrology magazines were taking in subscriptions and doing horoscopes, etc. Why they found that it was during the cycle high, when it's your personal new moon, that the money came in the most, and that the least amount of money came in on your cycle lows. And so that's just a little side note, because most people don't realize that Carl was the first astrological researcher that we had in the United States. And that's because most of the information was published in astrology magazines, and they're out of print now. And he's been forgotten in many ways, but hopefully this new book will revive some of that. So let's look at the concept of the measurements of the sun and the moon, because in the ancient world, they used stone circles to mark the seasons and to mark not only the beginning of the 4 seasons, which you'll see here. If you look at my cursor, you have the summer solstice and you have the winter solstice, and then you have the equinox in between. So that would be 0 Cancer, Libra Aries, or 0 Capricorn. But they also marked the lowest point the moon could rise and the highest point that the moon could rise. And if you had 56 stones in a circle, then you are able to follow the eclipses and track the lunar nodes. If you had 56 stones, you could measure the seasons and all the cycles of the moon with it. So here's another picture that will give you this idea, is that we have the Earth's orbit, which is also called the ecliptic. It's also the path of the zodiac. It's the path of the sun around the Earth. They're all the same plane. The plane of the zodiac, the plane of the Earth's orbit is one and the same. But then you have the plane of the moon right here, and it's at a different angle and tilt. And so where the moon's plane crosses the Earth's plane is where you will have the nodes. So you have the north node and you have the south node. But so when you have the sun coming in alignment with this node in the plane, you will have an eclipse. But the high points, the 90-degree aspects, you will find 90 degrees from those nodes will be a moon wobble position here, and one south and one north. So if you confused or curious, this is the points of the moon wobbles. These are the points of the eclipses.